Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the documentary One to One, John and Yoko, directed by Kevin Macdonald and Sam Rice Edwards. This is a really enjoyable and interesting documentary. It kind of follows on from Peter Jackson's Mammoth documentary series, a bit like What Did John Do Next? And it focuses on a couple of years when John and Yoko moved to New York City. It's interesting from a number of perspectives. It gives a better picture of John and Yoko as a couple. In the Jackson documentary, she's often just hanging around in the studio, so she really looked like a hanger-on. It did very little to present her as anything different. This is about John and Yoko, the couple. We see a lot more of her and of how John and her worked together in this period. The film does serve to give Yoko a much more sympathetic presentation, and we learn about the cruel hatred that she faced in the press and on the streets. We also learn a lot about their political activism. John and Yoko were idealists in a really good way, and this was a turbulent time in the US, particularly with the war in Vietnam. We see Lennon really enthusiastic about the possibility of something new. I actually felt quite sad watching this in one way. It felt like this was a period where change felt possible, peace, love, ending hunger. 50 years later, if anything, things have changed for the worse. But I enjoyed their passion and excitement around their activism and their willingness to take action themselves. We hear John talking about the idea of a political tour of the US, and his idea to pay the bail of prisoners stuck in jail. They also organise a concert after seeing a documentary about the treatment of mentally handicapped children in a facility. The documentary is structured around the benefit concert, and this works well. We get to see a lot of the performance, which is really good. There's a great version of Come Together, and at the end they lead the audience in singing Give Peace a Chance with Stevie Wonder singing the vocals. Lennon felt that his phone was being tapped, which was probably true, so he recorded a lot of his phone conversations, and this provides a really interesting source of information. The documentary really uses many of these conversations, and I liked the way this was presented with text provided on the screen, split into two for each part of the conversation. This worked really well. I do have some criticisms of the documentary. First, the filmmakers have recreated their New York apartment down to the last detail. As much as possible, I think it's supposed to look kind of lived in. There's a smoking cigarette in the ashtray. The TV is showing programs from that period. I thought that this added nothing to the documentary. Sure, show us photographs or film of the actual apartment, but to me, this was just totally synthetic. There's no purpose to it. I guess they can use it as a set in the upcoming Beatles films. And at least we didn't see actors dressed up as John and Yoko. The apartment was always empty. The second criticism relates to the content of the documentary on US culture and US TV. This is given context by a comment from John about how much he likes watching TV in the US. We then get lots of sequences of hopping between channels, giving us random snapshots of all aspects of US early 1970s culture. Where this related to Lennon's music, for example, John Sinclair and Attica, this was really good. However, I'm not sure why the rest of it was there. It's not a strong enough reason that Lennon said he liked TV. If we had him or Yoko talking about specific references, that would be different. What I will say is that it looks good. It's such a rich period in US culture that a documentary of just that would be really compelling, I think. So I actually enjoyed all of these clips, but they had no relevance to the film, many of them. It felt like they were there just to make it look cool, which it did, but it was style over substance, when there was so much substance to focus on. The third criticism is that I think Yoko was still sold a bit short. I think that Yoko was a really interesting artist prior to meeting John Lennon, and I think a bit more of the documentary could have been devoted to her art. There was a brief reference to a piece involving being inside a black bag, and we do see John involved in a performance of it, But the biggest reference to her work was a series of telephone conversations about securing live flies for one of her artworks. And this was kind of done in a jokey way. Indeed, people laughed in the screening I was at. It was funny, but I think the risk is that her work seemed reduced to providing the humour in the film. We do see more of Yoko's singing. It's easy to criticise her singing. I actually think there is something in her singing. It's kind of foreseeing a punk sound, and it definitely should be seen more as experimental art performance as opposed to straightforward singing. But I don't think her singing is her best artwork. I do think that if they really wanted to do Yoko justice, they would have said more or showed more about her art. My final criticism relates to the cut-off point. I do think that the film benefits from the narrow focus of picking a particular time period as opposed to telling his life story. But I do think that the film risks not giving a full picture, even taking into account this time focus. It's around the time that the film ends that Yoko and John split, and there's no mention of this. Also, John lived another 6 or 7 years after the time that the film ended, but he didn't continue living in a similar way. This was his last live performance, I think, and I'm not sure he was as politically active. The short period covered by this film perhaps presents a slightly misleading picture. All that said, this is a really enjoyable documentary. I learned new things, it's entertaining, it's refreshing to see people passionate about changing the world, and it is enjoyable to see John perform his music. I would recommend this documentary. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.